Ask most football supporters about Willie Johnston. And one moment comes first. Argentina. A failed drugs test. A career forever tied to controversy. Others remember something else. The fiery temper. The suspensions. The moments when brilliance gave way to frustration. Over time, those moments became the story. The footballer slowly disappeared, but history rarely tells the whole truth. Wee Bud was lightning, not because of what happened in Argentina, because of what he could do with a football. So how did one of Britain's most feared wingers become remembered for one moment, instead of an extraordinary career? The answer was never in the headlines. It was always with the people who stood beside him, and the ones who tried to stop him. Subscribe now, because by the end of this story, you may never look at Willie Johnston the same way again.
Willie of Rangers came, and Johnston is his second name.
The headlines remembered one story. The players remembered another. Former Rangers striker Colin Stein knew exactly what Johnston brought to the team. He said, "I wanted to play with two great wingers, Willie Henderson and Willie Johnston." Derek Parlane had admired Johnston before they ever became teammates. He remembered entering the Rangers dressing room and sitting beside the players he had once watched from the stands. Johnston was one of them. Parlane joked, "I should have brought my autograph book." Decades later, Willie Donachie gave an even simpler verdict. Johnston was world-class, a winner capable of deciding matches. Different men, different clubs, yet they remembered the same footballer, not the controversy. The relentless competitor, the fearless winger, the player who earned their respect long before the headlines ever defined him. And that reputation would soon be tested on one unforgettable night in Barcelona. Great players earn respect on football's biggest stages. For Willie Johnston, that stage was the Camp Nou. Rangers had reached the 1972 European Cup Winners' Cup final. Waiting for them in Barcelona were Dynamo Moscow. Colin Stein opened the scoring. Then Johnston took control. He struck Rangers second, then added the third. Rangers were leading 3-0 in a European final. Dynamo Moscow fought back. They scored once, then again. Suddenly, Rangers' greatest European night was hanging in the balance. But Johnston's 2 goals had given them enough. Rangers held on. 3-2. European champions. Years later, Colin Stein refused to accept all the praise. Everyone remembers goal scorers, so Willie and myself get the accolades. But everyone played their part. Stein understood what the scoreboard could not explain. It had taken an entire team to conquer Europe. But on the defining night, Willie Johnston had scored twice. Long before one moment changed the conversation around him, Johnston had already written his name into Rangers history. Then football delivered the twist nobody saw coming. One tournament, one test, one decision, and everything changed. Football can spend years building a reputation, then lose it in a single afternoon. For Willie Johnston, that afternoon came at the 1978 FIFA World Cup. He had reached the biggest stage of his career. Representing Scotland, living the dream every footballer chases. Then came a routine drugs test. At first, it meant nothing. Players took them all the time. Johnston expected to walk away and prepare for the next match. Instead, the result changed everything. The test came back positive. Almost overnight, the football disappeared. The headlines no longer spoke about his fearless runs, his European performances, or the respect he had earned from teammates and opponents. Johnston maintained that he had taken 2 tablets because he was suffering from hay fever. The tablets contained phencamphemin, a banned stimulant. He insisted he had not taken them to improve his performance. But the explanation couldn't stop what came next. Johnston was expelled from the Scotland squad and sent home. His World Cup was over, and he would never represent Scotland again. One decision, one headline, one label. For millions of supporters, that became the Willie Johnston story. But the people who knew him best never believed one moment could erase an entire career. And they refused to let it. The public had reached its verdict, but Johnston was about to discover who still stood beside him. When he finally returned to England, West Brom manager Ron Atkinson was waiting. Johnston came home alone, surrounded by reporters, carrying the weight of everything that had happened. But Atkinson made one thing clear: his West Brom career was not over. The club would stand by him. That support mattered. Because Johnston had not only lost his place at the World Cup, He had returned to a country already prepared to condemn him. West Brom chose something different. They chose to protect their player. And when Johnston returned to the pitch, the football was still there. The pace, the confidence, the willingness to attack. One tournament had changed his reputation, but it had not taken away his ability. Years later, Johnston finally explained what that period had truly cost him. For years, Johnston was asked the same question: Argentina. His answer never became easier. He called it the worst period of my football life. Then he went further. It was the worst period of his entire life, apart from losing his wife. The punishment had not ended when he left Argentina. His family faced the consequences too. Reporters followed the story, strangers passed judgment, and his children encountered the scandal at school. Johnston could accept responsibility for taking the tablets. What he struggled to accept was the belief that one decision contained the truth about his entire career. Hundreds of appearances, major trophies, European nights, 2 goals in a continental final. None of it had disappeared. It had only become harder to see, but the footballers who knew him had never forgotten it. Johnston could not control which moment the public remembered, but he could not erase what football had witnessed either. The speed Parlane remembered, the service Colin Stein valued, the match-winning ability Willie Donachie called world-class. Different players, different generations, the same respect. In the end, the loudest voices were never the newspapers. They were the footballers, the men who trained beside him, the defenders who chased him, the captains who trusted him. Years after the final whistle, they weren't talking about controversy. They were talking about courage. Former teammates remembered a player who demanded the ball when the pressure was greatest. Opponents remembered a winger who never stopped asking questions. One run after another, one attack after another, one challenge after another. That is why their memories endured. Because respect in football cannot be manufactured. It has to be earned. And Willie Johnston earned it. Not with perfect moments, but with performances that stayed in people's minds long after the match had ended. Perhaps that is why the people who knew football best never reduced him to a single chapter. They remembered the fearless winger, the relentless competitor, the teammate, the opponent, the footballer. In the end, that is how football's biggest names remembered Willie Johnston. And perhaps that is how the rest of us should remember him too. Subscribe, because one headline never tells the whole story.